Hi everyone, I'm Zophar, founder of Zophar's Domain, one of the first archives dedicated to console emulation and preservation. Way back in March of 1999, a programmer named Randy Linden released Bleam, one of the first PlayStation emulators capable of running games at playable speeds in something as modest as a Pentium 166. At the time, it shocked the gaming world and quickly became one of the most talked about pieces of emulation software ever released. He'd go on to port Bleam to the Sega Dreamcast, a feat once thought unimaginable. But Randy's career goes even deeper than that. He's also the programmer behind the incredibly ambitious Super Nintendo version of Doom, a port that pushed the Super Nintendo hardware far beyond what was once thought possible, as well as NES titles like Home Alone and Where's Waldo. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Randy himself. I hope you all enjoy. Well, hello, Randy Linden. What's up, buddy?
Hello, Z. How you doing?
Good, good. Finally got to see you face to face. Full
Exactly.
transparency, I did know what you looked like, but I've never gotten to actually like talk to you before like this. So, uh,
Yeah. We've chatted on Discord and in email, but never one-on-one.
exactly. It's a real pleasure having you, man. I've always wanted to chat with you, and I got a whole bunch of questions lined up for you. So I hope
Good,
you're
good.
ready for this. Just burning questions over the decades. But listen, first off, I want to thank you for being here. A lot of people have been asking about this. I know you've done some other interviews, over the years. But every time I do anything on YouTube, someone always inevitably asks, "Hey, can you get the guy that did Bleam? What about that emulator guy, Randy? Like, why don't you chat with him?" I'm like, "Oh, it'd be my pleasure." Little do you
That's
know, we've
nice.
chatted many times over the years, just never like this. So
Yeah,
it should be
that's
a fun
awesome.
time. Awesome, dude. So my
Okay.
first question for you is, how did you break into the video game industry to begin with?
That's a good one. Um, we, when I was in junior high school, our junior high received a couple of Commodore PET computers. The big, all built in like a tank, green screen, the 4032 Commodore PETs, and you could borrow time on the computer and learn how to program. And from that, my mother got me for the holidays one year a Commodore 64. And it was like at a department store. And it came with the monitor, with a disk drive, with the computer, and a desk.
A desk too. All right.
It came
Now we're
it
getting
came with a
fancy.
yes, it came with a desk. Um, and I wrote my first game when I was 13, and it was a Centipede clone called Bubbles. And instead of the centipede with the individual segments, there were little fish. So it was a school of fish that and you were Clarence the clam,
Huh.
and your clam opened up and it bubbles came out of the clam, and that's how you hit the fish.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's how you started out. So how did you get from Clarence the Fish into some of the other stuff you ended up doing?
Um, Believe it or not, I tried to do a Dragon's Lair on the Commodore 64 because I really liked this was when I was going to high school. There was an arcade across the street from the high school, and they got in a Dragon's Lair machine, and I was just captivated by it. And I had no idea about laser discs or anything like that, and thought, well, this would make a great game for the Commodore 64. And started to like with the little title, pardon me, the status bar at the bottom, and got that working. And of course, nothing really ever came of it. But it was good practice for programming because I then worked on the Pocket. It was called Paperback originally, Paperback Filer, which was a database program, and there was an Office suite back in the Commodore 64 days called Paperback Office. And it was Paperback Writer, which was the word processor, paperback filer, which was the database, and paperback planner, which was the spreadsheet. And there were three guys, and we each wrote one of the programs, and it was put out by a company called Digital Solutions. And they later changed the name from paperback to pocket because paperback writer.
The Beatles.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah. Yes. And so they changed the name to Pocket, and it became Pocket Office. And Pocket Filer was the database program that I worked on. It was for the Commodore 64, and then we did Commodore 128 versions, and then we got Amigas in at the office and fell in love with the Amiga. And I thought, well, this is a great time for me to go back and revisit Dragon's Lair. So I did some work on Dragon's Lair for the Amiga.
And how did you make out with that? How were the limitations? I know it's going to be a theme of the interview here is working with all the limitations of the hardware and trying to get it to work anyway. What was that like?
That was a challenge because the laser disc, and I don't have it here, but it's a big metallic, heavy duty disc, and I didn't have a laser player, and I really didn't have an idea of how I was going to do it, but I knew that the Amiga was possible. As far as it was possible as far as the hardware goes, uh, because I had seen the technical specs, I had seen demos. There were a lot of music um, players, music trackers for the Amiga. The graphics were out of this world. And for me, the challenge was going to be the compression. And so the first thing I did was walk downtown Toronto, going from arcade to arcade, trying to find a Dragon's Lair machine. And when I finally did find one, I asked about the borrowing the laser disc, and they gave me the information on uh, the company called Cinematronics, which was the company that made the electronics and the disc for the game. And I wrote and called Cinematronics, and they agreed to sell me a copy of the Dragon's Lair Laserdisc because they didn't really care. They didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just
Right.
said, I wanted the disc.
Right.
And I did, of course, it didn't have a laser player. So I had to go to a company that was in downtown Toronto and rent a Laserdisc player. So I rented the Laserdisc player, and then I needed a way of digitizing the graphics. And nowadays, everybody takes photos with their camera. Digitizers are very commonplace, but back then, digitizing was a new technology. And there was a company called Sunrise Industries, and they made an audio digitizer called Perfect Sound, and I was able to easily do the audio digitizing. But they made a prototype hardware called Perfect Vision. I think it was called Perfect Vision, and it was a digitizer where it digitized without the need for red, green, and blue filters,
Oh, interesting.
because the digitizers back then were basically black and white cameras, and you put a filter in and did the red, put another filter in and did the green, another one in and it was a very, very tedious manual process. Well, an interesting note is that the Sunrise Industries founders, his name was Anthony Wood,
Hmm.
and he is the guy who formed Roku.
Oh, that's interesting and convenient.
Yeah, yeah. So I know Anthony, and
That's
their hardware
awesome.
was always top notch. So, as I said, the difficulty was going to be doing the video compression. So this was around the time when crunchers and compression technology was just starting to come out on the Amiga. And so I developed a compression technology that basically takes the screen and divides it into vertical strips. And the reason I do it in vertical strips is because each strip is 8 pixels wide, which happens to be a byte. And I can take the strip and I can mirror the strip. And instead of decompressing from right to left, I decompress from left to right and mirror the individual strips. And it basically does the whole screen mirroring. So you could play the game with the different levels. Sometimes you have to move left and then right, and other times you'd have to move right and then left. And so that was part of the technology behind the compression.
Oh, okay. Clever. That's so at first interesting you bring up, Roku. I'm very familiar with Roku. In my line of, well, my previous line of work, my company did lots of business with Roku. So that's really awesome that he went on to to do that.
Yeah,
Those are some pretty cool streaming devices.
yeah.
Um and I like just your thought process. Like it looks like you just take what you're given, right? What you have to work with, and you come up with some really, really unique ways of making it work, regardless of those limitations. So,
Yeah, yeah. The Amiga, I had experience in between the paperback and pocket filer and Dragon's Lair. I did a program called the 64 Emulator. And the
oh,
64 Emulator was basically a bridge program that it was one of the very first commercially available emulators. And the reason that I did it was because there was no way to take the Commodore 64 library, and there were millions and millions of Commodore 64s and tens or hundreds of thousands of programs, but it's a 6502 based system, but the Amiga was 68,000 based, and there was no way to run the Commodore 64 programs on the Amiga. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a program? And it turned out to be a program and some hardware that would allow you to take Commodore 64 software and run it on the Amiga. So I did the 64 emulator, and that gave me a lot of experience writing low-level all assembly code on the Amiga. Coming from the Commodore 64 side of things, I knew exactly what needed to be done.
interesting. And that I can see how one led to another. I mean, that both
Right.
those processors, versions of those were used in the NES, right? The 6502, and the Sega
Hmm.
Genesis was a 68K processor. So,
Exactly. There were
okay, this
very,
is
very
interesting.
popular processors. And so that's why eventually I ended up going on to the NES and then the Super NES because I was intimately familiar
Right.
with the 6502. I was also familiar with the 68,000 from the Amiga days, but yeah, those were low cost, very, very powerful processors for the day. And that's how I sort of got my start into emulation.
That's great. Well, that brings us to a little transition point since you brought up the 6502 and I brought up the NES. What was it like to work on titles like Home Alone and Where's Waldo? Tell me, I'm dying to know. Home Alone, especially, is kind of a meme. I think it's great. I love it. I did remember I did my
Yeah,
speed run of it a couple years ago on Christmas just for funsies. But what
yeah,
what was
yeah,
what
yeah.
was what was it like working on them, and how did you get into it?
I started I was working at a company called Bethesda Softworks, the
Never
same,
heard of them.
exactly, the same one, but this was back in 1989, 90, 91-ish, out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, or Rockville, Maryland, this was where their office was, and did Dragon's Lair Escape from Singe's Castle on the Amiga. And they were looking at licenses. They had Wayne Gretzky hockey that they put out for the PC, and they got the technical information about the what was called the Famicom or the NES. And it was a very, very basic system, character-based, no high-res graphics modes, um, basic sound processor. It was very, very simplistic hardware compared to, say, the Commodore 64 or the Amiga. But Bethesda received the specifications, and I set about working on a version of Wayne Gretzky hockey. And I ported the project from the PC and Amiga over to the NES. It took about 6 weeks. So it was a very, very fast project, but it was fun. And then the people at Bethesda said, well, we can get licenses for a bunch of other titles. And Home Alone was a very, very big title at the time.
I remember.
And they were able to get a license for it. And so my programming partner, his name was Paul Coletta, great programmer. And he and I designed a game that was what eventually became Home Alone. But it was more about sneaking around and collecting traps, collecting items to build more traps, placing the traps. It was a sneaky style game before like Thief and similar titles that were sort of creep around and try and be quiet and don't get noticed. Like Metal Gear Solid, where you have to sort of run around and the guards can't make a direct line of sight, otherwise you're seen. That was the basic premise of what we wanted to do with Home Alone. And what we got was, well, the program has to be done in time for Christmas. And when you think that it has to be done in time for Christmas, that doesn't take into account the fact that back then, and it's still very similar today with the Nintendo Switch, back then, the cartridges were all manufactured in Japan. So you had to basically make a ROM and then send that to Nintendo, and Nintendo would test the ROM to make sure that everything was up to their level of quality, to make sure that there were no glaring bugs or problems. And then you had to prepay for the manufacture of all the cartridges. And then over a course of like 6 or 8 weeks, literally on a boat would arrive the cartridges, and then it would get sent to distributors, to the retailers, and eventually it would get into the people's homes. So Home Alone turned out to be another 6 week project. The problem was that it was a unique title, so we didn't really have the ability to do a port. We couldn't just, do a translation of some of the code. It was a let's see what we can do to
What
make
we
this
get.
thing happen. Yeah.
So in that game, since we're talking about Home Alone, there's a bug. I know you're aware of it.
Yes,
And it's
the bug.
it's the big bug that makes anyone, even if you can't speedrun any game, like you can speedrun Home Alone because it involves you just getting I can't remember if it's Harry or Marv, which character it is, but yeah, as you know, it involves you getting them to chase you in a very specific way so that they get
Yes.
stuck on the side of the house. And once they get
Yes.
stuck on the side of the house, you can just sit there and let time run out and tra la la around and go
Hmm.
underneath and go on the little, the outside area in the tree house. What was it and I know you're on a very tight deadline, but let us like give us some detail on how that bug, why it happens. Like, why did they get
Why
stuck,
it
as far as you're
happens.
aware? Yeah.
Yeah. The logic. Let me back up a sec. Home Alone is much more technically complex than it first appears. And for that, I mean the graphics use multiple what are known as raster interrupts. Basically, when the display gets to a certain line on the screen, I switched the character set so that allowed us to do better looking graphics for both Home Alone and Where's Waldo. And it was something that wasn't really done at the time. It uses the MMC3 mapper chip, which was a fairly expensive advanced mapping chip, but it didn't really help with any of the AI, any of the logic. So what basically happens is you maneuver the enemies into a certain position, they get confused, and then they can no longer locate you. That's basically what's happening.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's a fun. It's so I'll say this like that. I could never beat it the real way. Like to this day, I
No,
cannot. I can't beat it the
it's
real way.
hard.
It's a difficult game. But it's fun, and it's got elements of like you got to get creative and figure out which items to pick up so you can trap them and slow them down. And so it is
Right.
definitely a creative game. But when I found out a few years back about that bug, and I saw on speedrun.com, there's like hundreds of people with all the same time,
Yes.
of course, right? Just running out the clock. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna give this a try, and I had a lot of fun with it. So, thank you for inadvertently popping that bug in there without realizing it due to your tight timeline. I think it made the game even more fun for people like me that can't beat video games.
Well, as it turns out, I'm terrible at video games. I am like terrible at video games. Playing them, that is. Writing them, not so much. Playing them, terrible. And the only game that I have ever finished is Super Mario World for the Super NES. It's the only one
Interesting. I didn't know you only finished that one game. That's interesting.
that's, yeah, out of all the games that I played a number of games. I played 140 hours of Breath of the Wild on the Switch.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing game. But the only other one that I've actually played, I used to enjoy a lot of different games. I liked Dragon's Lair, can't beat it. I
Huh.
liked
Interesting.
Xevious, can't beat it. I liked Venture, can't get past the first few levels. Doom, can't get past the first few levels of Doom either. Uh,
I remember we were talking about that. I can't remember if it was either last year or the year before when I was streaming the original Super Nintendo Doom that you ported, which we're going to talk about in a second. It's my next question. And what did I get to? I think I got to level 3 before I
level
rage quit.
three.
And you're like, that's further than I ever got. I was like,
Yeah, I
really?
can get to level two. I can
Yeah.
get to level two, and then I get lost in that maze where it's like all dark and some flashing areas, and before you get to the chainsaw, because I saw you get the chainsaw there,
hmm
and yeah, can't make it out.
So on that subject of Doom, how did your involvement in the project come to be? How did you get involved in porting Doom? Walk us through everything that occurred to make it all happen.
It's a good question. It's there's a lot of, I think you sort of hit on it before. There's a lot of things that I sort of like to say the planets align before something can happen. And I've just been very, very lucky that things sort of really aligned themselves well. I was working at a company called Sculptured Software, and they were at the top of the development uh, companies list as far as technical excellence and great gameplay. They did things like the Super Star Wars. They did up for the Super NES. They did Mortal Kombat
I
for the
remember that.
Super NES.
Yep.
So they had a group of really, really talented programmers, artists, musicians, top notch. And I was working for Sculptured Software on a monster truck game, with big monster trucks and at the I guess it was 1990, probably 94 or thereabouts. There was an invitation sent out to get the game developers, so Sculptured Software received it, to send their senior level programmers to Nintendo for a special developers conference. And so we went, and there was a big room, and the developers from all over North America, I think it was all over the world, were there, and there was rows and rows and rows of seats and a projector screen. And so we all sat down, and they dimmed the lights, and what they showed us was the opening animation and sequence from Star Fox running on the Super FX chip. And you could imagine the room was just in awe of what the technology was doing on the Super Nintendo. So when the lights came back up, everybody stood up and gave it a standing ovation.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. Um, so that developer conference was when Sculptured, they had sent myself, they sent me, they sent another guy, his name was John Morgan, who I met at a company called Leland Interactive Media. They did Super Off-Road the Baja. It's an into-the-screen 3D um, faked game that looks really amazing on the Super Nintendo. And he and I both left Leland and went to work at Sculptured. And so we were at this developer conference, and John's forte was strong mathematics. He was an expert when it came to all things math, basically. And Sculptured decided that what they wanted to do was a dirt track racing game, but all 3D, all polygons using the Super FX chip. The problem was, although Sculptured had created development systems for the Nintendo 8-bit, that's what I used to write the Nintendo 8-bit games. I used the development system from Sculptured software.
Makes sense.
And they had development systems they created for the Super Nintendo. What they didn't have was one for the Super FX chip, because it was a brand new chip with brand new technology, brand new opcodes, brand new execution, brand new technology, basically. And so they needed some way of developing for the Super FX. And I had a development system that I had written on the Amiga for developing for Commodore 64, Commodore 128, Apple II GS, Nintendo 8-bit, Super Nintendo. And I said, well, I can add support to my development system for the Super FX chip. But what we're going to need is a list of the opcodes and the instructions and the memory map and how this chip basically operates, because the little 40-page pamphlet that we got at this Nintendo Developer Conference didn't have any of that information. It was, here's how you do 3D math, and here's how you do transformations and rotations and that kind of stuff. But none of the low level, here's how the Super FX chip operates. So Sculptured, being one of the favored developers for Nintendo, received that information. With that, I was able to write the software, but we still had a problem. There was no hardware development systems. So I came up with this idea that we called the Romulator. Basically, I said, let's go out to the store and buy a couple of Star Fox cartridges. That would have the chip in it, the special Star Fox chip. So we take the cartridges, we open up, take out the plastic, and let's desolder the ROM chip.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
And then we'll solder on RAM and a little tiny boot ROM program so that when you turn on the system, the boot ROM can take control. And I devised a serial communication protocol that operated through the joystick ports. So you basically plugged in this special little adapter that I made, and you plugged it in between your Super Nintendo and your Amiga. And you turn on the Super Nintendo, my little boot ROM kicks in and takes control, and it's able to communicate back and forth to the Amiga. And because there's RAM sitting there on the cartridge now instead of ROM, the Amiga could read and write the RAM, and that allowed us to develop the software, download it from the Amiga into the Super Nintendo, and run the program.
So that was your little hardware development center. It was on the Amiga using software you specifically wrote so it would interface with the Super NES. That's awesome. Wow.
That's
It didn't
exactly
exist.
it.
So you had to, it said if it doesn't exist, I might as well create it.
Well, that was exactly it. And in the process of doing so, this will eventually get around to Doom. In the process of doing so, I needed to write some test programs to make sure that I could download code, that I could read and write to memory, to video RAM, that I could execute Super FX instructions and understand exactly how the processor operated. And I thought, what better project than Doom? Because Doom was taking over the world at that point. It was very, very popular. The office the office was based out of Salt Lake City, would play deathmatch of Doom every night. And so I thought, what a great showcase for the Super FX chip and for the technology, and started to work on Doom. So I basically got E1M1 operational. There were no floors and no ceilings. There were no objects, no enemies. There was a status bar, but there was no weapon sprite. But you could run around the world, and it looked like E1M1. And I showed it, brought it in, and showed it to the president, George Metas, and Vice President Kelly Zmack at Sculptured Software, and said, "This is something I've been working on. I think it's got potential." And they took one look at it and said, "Wow, that's Doom running on a Super Nintendo. We've got to do this. We've got to make this into an actual project."
So at that point, did Sculptured reach out to id Software? Like, is that how that went? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Sculptured reached out to id Software and said, "We think that we can do Doom on the Super Nintendo." And id Software was like, "No, it's not possible." So what they did was they sent someone to id Software to show them that it could actually be done and it was running. And they said, "Wow, this is amazing. Yes, we'll absolutely do it." And then Sculptured put their whole weight behind the project. They added a team of artists and the musicians to help get everything done. There was testers. There were people who really knew Doom and all the ins and outs of how everything fit together and where all the different secrets are, and all of the map changes that had to be made. There weren't many of them, but there were some things like, for example, the grate textures that are the diagonal grates that you can sort of see through. Well, my engine doesn't do that. So we had to remove those. So there was people that did that kind of stuff. It was a big project.
That's awesome. So the Doom, was it running the Super FX or the FX2 chip?
It started off originally on the Super FX. So it was running at 10 point, I want to say 7 megahertz. I think it was 10.7 megahertz. Uh, and so it was, imagine the original Doom, but running at half the speed, because it, yeah, the Super FX2 was twice the clock rate. It was 21 megahertz. Um,
So the FX chip would have given it what, 5 frames a second, somewhere
yeah,
that runs.
exactly.
Yeah.
5 frames a second. That's what the demo was that I showed to Sculptured. That's what id Software saw. They saw E1M1 running at effectively 5 or maybe 6 frames a second, and they decided to go with it anyway.
Ah, it makes sense. I mean, especially if you consider all the people like me out there that didn't even have a PC at that time. I didn't get my first PC till like late 94, early 95. So all I had was my Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, my Sega CD, those systems, NES. So the ability, I remember when Wolfenstein 3D came out for the Super Nintendo, even though, nowadays we look at that port and we kind of chuckle at all the censorship that it had that kind of ruined it. But
Yes,
the fact that it existed, like, it's like, okay, I could get Wolfenstein 3D on a Super Nintendo or not have it at all. Like, I'll take Wolfenstein 3D, right? Same concept with Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo, even without the blood and
hmm,
fatalities. So no, it
yeah,
totally makes sense that id Software would have seen that and said, "Let's go for it." And I'm glad that I assume the FX2 chip that came along later in the development cycle when you realized, oh, I can use this instead and get much better
yes,
performance.
yeah. It is exactly it. The Super FX 2 came along, and at that point, this was probably 7 or 8 months into the development. Uh, Nintendo had actually created a hardware-based development system. So they sent us one, uh, and I was able to reverse engineer their hardware and interface it again to the Amiga. So basically, it looked like a small refrigerator. It was called the Nintendo Ice SE, and it could do single stepping. It had hardware breakpoints. It had some really amazing features, but importantly, it had the ability to develop for the Super FX2 chip. And the big difference between the Super FX2 and the Super FX1 is twofold. It's got twice as much memory space, so it could hold 2 MB, and it runs at twice the clock rate. So instead of 10.7, it runs at 21.4 megahertz. And that made a big difference because it made the ability to do Doom something that otherwise wouldn't have happened because a 6 frame or 5 frame per second game wasn't going to cut it. Even at 10 frames a second, it was slow. But as you said, the 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 reason that I think Doom did well, and one of the primary motivations for me to do it, was because people didn't have a PC. Back then, PCs were many thousands of dollars, and
They sure
people
were.
had Super Nintendo, they had Genesis, but they didn't have a PC. Some people had PCs, but most people didn't. And this was a way of bringing Doom to all the people that didn't have a PC.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Well, thank you for doing that because a lot of
My
people, like
pleasure.
you said, got to enjoy it because of you. That
Yeah.
people like me that didn't have when I finally got a PC, which was in 1994, my first one was it wasn't even a 486, which was like the common one at the time. I had a 286
Oh,
from the 80s. The floppy drives were 5 1/4 actual floppy disks, and
yes.
I think maybe it was 8 megahertz. It was ridiculously slow, and it couldn't do much. It ran DOS, an early version of DOS. So Doom was not on the menu for me at that point at all.
Right.
None of that stuff was. So thank you for doing it. It's awesome.
My pleasure.
So we're gonna kind of segue now into the emulation side of things here.
Okay.
Uh, what is it? I know you touched on this a little bit already in talking about your experience when trying to get Dragon's Lair going with emulation. So that is that what got you interested in emulation? Was that first moment like you were talking about earlier?
Sort of. I think what really got me interested in emulation to begin with was when I had the Commodore 64, and I was a developer on the Commodore 64, and I also had my own library of games and a few, utility programs, things like that, that were either on cassette or floppy disk, and needed a way to use that library of software titles on my Amiga, because I had bought an Amiga 1000, and it had 256K of RAM, and it was amazing compared to the Commodore 64. But there was no way to use the programs that were written for the Commodore 64 on the Amiga. So originally, my motivation was let's make a bridge for all the Commodore 64 owners out there, because they're going to be in the same position. If Commodore wants them to continue with Commodore as their computer company, you bought a Commodore 64, maybe you upgraded to a Commodore 128, now you want to go to Amiga, there needs to be some sort of way of providing continuity, uh, at least to provide the ability to load your old word processing documents and your old spreadsheets and databases and your recipe list and what have you. And so that's really what got me started in emulation. I was working on the Amiga, then I started to work on Doom, and eventually I was working on the PC. and as it turns out, put in a PlayStation disc into my PC. I was just curious, didn't know anything about the PlayStation at the time, and it was a regular disc, despite being the black colored disc. It was a regular CD, and it had files on it. It had a program on it. It had graphics data. It had all sorts of stuff on it. And I thought, well, what about all those people who don't have a PlayStation but now have a PC? This was sort of the whole Doom argument, but in reverse, where
Hmm.
in Doom it was there's lots of people that don't have a PC, but they've got a Super Nintendo. This was there's lots of people who have a PC now because PCs were ubiquitous. They're all over, many tens or hundreds of millions of them, but they may not have a PlayStation. And the PlayStation had this amazing library of 3D games, whereas on the PC, 3D wasn't really a thing. There was no direct 3D. There wasn't really DirectX because DirectX had just started. There was direct draw, there was direct input. Basically, these are APIs for communicating with the hardware, but there wasn't really direct 3D because there wasn't really 3D hardware. And yet the PlayStation had this $199 PlayStation had this amazing library of games. And I thought it would be great to provide a bridge for all those people who had a PC and a CD drive to be able to play their PlayStation games. And that's basically how Bleam started.
This guy right here.
Ah, yes.
So the reason, part of why I was late to the interview today, just so you all know, I absolutely was late. Thank you, Randy, for humoring me.
No
I had meant to
problem.
do this yesterday as part of my prep, but I went into my attic because I knew I had it somewhere. I knew I don't throw anything away. I keep everything.
Wow.
So I went and I found my old 90s copy of Bleam. And
That's one of the early ones because it's
yep,
it's in the
it's in
black and it's yeah,
along with the copy protection rings. I don't know if you can tell on the camera,
you
but
can't really
it's hard to
see
see
it.
it. Yeah.
It's hard to see
Oh, there
it.
we go.
Oh,
Here we
there
go.
you go.
There
Yeah, there they are.
they are.
Yeah,
So let's talk a little. Let's go a little bit deeper here.
sure.
So that's you answered my question that would have been next, which is what inspired you to create it.
Mhm.
So where does this is like a point of there were a lot of people on X, and we're going to get into their questions later, but this is one of the ones I had too. They all asked the same question. What does Bleem actually mean? Does it have a meaning, and why did you name it that?
Bleem doesn't have a meaning.
Interesting.
Yes, yes. It's just a made up word. It sounded good. It was near the beginning of the alphabet. Um, but Bleem does not have a meaning. Had I thought, well, it would be great. I just called it Bleem um, because I needed a name. All my projects typically have names. Um, Doom was the reality engine. Bleam was red, RED. I'm trying to think what other projects that people would recognize. 64 emulator was emu. So I basically have a code name for the project and the actual name, and I couldn't come up with a name, so I just thought Bleem.
Bleem.
It sounds
It
good.
rolls off the tongue.
It rolls off the tongue. It was something that wasn't copyrighted, wasn't trademarked, was unique, wasn't in use. The website, there was no Bleem website, there was no name, no word. It was something that was available. Some people came up with some really interesting, articulate things for Bleam as to what it could mean, but yeah, it does not
So it
have a meaning.
has no meaning. My favorite one that I thought maybe it could be, and now I know the truth. Somebody, and I've heard this one before, but someone on X said this. Does Bleam stand for best little
Little
emulator ever
emulator
made?
ever made. Yes, I thought that was amazing. The reason I think they said that is because Bleam was very small. The program itself was very, very small. This is part and parcel because it was written in assembly language, all of it. There was no C, there was no C++. It was all written in assembly language, and that's how I had previously done all of my other projects. For comparison, the Dragon's Lair program, the actual program that runs Dragon's Lair on the Amiga, is about 6K total. Now, the data is spread across 6 disks for all the graphics and the sound, but the actual program is only 6K. So I
Very
was used
tiny.
to writing in assembly language, which is nice and compact, very efficient. And that's why our minimum spec for Bleam was so low. It was, I want to say, uh, Pentium. I don't even remember what the minimum spec. Can you?
Don't worry, I can answer that. Probably.
Okay,
Let's see.
perfect.
Let's see here. I think it tells you, doesn't it? Uh, it only tells you what version of DirectX, which is 6.x at the time. So
Uh,
where would you have been in the hardware cycle at that point for DirectX 6? Let's see. That'd have been like would we
I
have been
want to
in
say it
the
was 100 megahertz. Take a look on the back of the disk. Does it say anything
Oh, here
there?
we go. Here we go. All right,
Yeah.
so we have Pentium 166,
Oh,
16 megs of
166.
RAM.
Okay.
Yep,
I
166.
thought it was 100 and something, but 166. There you go. So it's a low end. This was before MMX. This was right at the time MMX was coming out. And MMX is basically additional instructions for the processor for multimedia use, for graphics, for sound, for that kind of stuff. There were different versions of the Bleam software that was all put together as one executable. It turned out to be a lot more complicated than I originally thought. But Bleam could use the AMD um, K6 now instructions. So there was multiple versions of the Bleam software packaged as one executable. So when you downloaded it, it downloaded all of it, and it loaded differently depending on
Depending
what
on
kind
your
of,
configuration. That makes
yeah,
sense.
exactly.
Clever. So, what was your end goal with Bleam? I know you mentioned a little bit earlier your motivation, right, was for people that didn't
Hmm.
have PlayStations but had PCs.
Yeah.
What did you see the end goal of Bleam being?
Bleam turned into, I think, a fight for emulation, for rights. I'm a believer in if you've bought something, you can do with it what you choose. If I chose to take a CD that I bought and stick it in a microwave and melt it down, that's my choice. If I choose to buy the software and put it into a PC and use it on a PC, that's my choice too. And it turned out to be something that other people don't agree with. They think that you've bought your software and it's for use on one particular platform, one particular set of hardware. I liken it to books. You could go and buy a book and you can read the book and you can give the book to somebody else and they
Hmm.
can read the book. You can tear the pages out of the book. You can burn the book. You can rewrite portions of the book. But once you've bought the book, it's your book. And I, in many ways, view software as a natural extension of that. And the original goal of Bleam was just to bring the tremendous library of top quality games on PlayStation to all the PC owners. That's really what it started out as. But it became a fight for rights and a fight to define what emulation was, because this was back in the day when emulation was verboten. It was bad. It was something that you shouldn't be doing. And yet, my own personal history and experience with the 64 emulator for the Amiga was a very positive one. The president of Commodore at the time, I was at a trade show for Amiga called Ami Expo, and the president of Commodore, I think it was Jack Tramiel, was walking around looking at all the different booths and came across the ReadySoft booth and saw the 64 emulator running and said, "This is exactly what we need more of." And it was an emulator that allowed their clients, their customers, to migrate over to their latest hardware. I think my Bleam business partner, David Herpelsheimer, thought about it very logically as well. And he basically said this should open the door for Sony to capture the PC market. Because if you can write your software for the PlayStation, but it can also run on a PC, just think about the potential and the opportunities there. But
At
Sony
the
didn't.
time, they didn't see it
Yeah,
that way at all.
yeah. Sony didn't see
Which,
it that way, and
which,
and yeah, it well, history turned out the way that it did. I think that now emulation is something that's commonplace, something that is used. There was emulation, back when I was in junior high and high school. There was for terminals because you had, like when you connected to a BBS
hmm
and you had your dial-up modem, and there was for the terminal there was what was known as VT100 emulation,
emulation, I remember.
and it was a way to provide interoperability. Imagine if you bought batteries and the batteries only worked with certain devices instead of a 9-volt working with anything that took a 9-volt battery, or the double A's or triple A's. The standards were there, and I think that's why those things are completely ubiquitous. I do think we're headed to a place where the hardware is de-emphasized, where it's not about technological leaps and who's got the best graphics and who's got the best sound and who's got this and who's got that. It's more about platform and reach. And I've been saying that for many years, and I think we're finally starting to see that, where the console industry is both imploding and exploding. It's imploding in the sense that there are fewer and fewer, but it's exploding in the sense that, well, now this is an Xbox and that's an Xbox, and it's like, really? Okay.
Right. It's no
Um,
longer about the platform itself. It's about the games and the software. Right. I know
right,
that
which
they've been
is
talking.
yeah,
Yeah. That's
which is exactly what I think people want.
that's
The
what we. Yep.
people want, if you've got a particular box in your home, you want the software to work on that box. It's why I've got a particular phone. I got that particular phone because it was ubiquitous, because I knew that whatever software I got for the phone, it was going to work on that phone. And I didn't have to worry about, is there an app for it and what version of it just
hmm Just want it to
works.
work. It just
It,
works. Yep.
that's the thing. It's like a telephone, it's like a television. It just works. And I think that that's where games are headed. For the longest time, it was all about the race to better graphics and better sound. And I think Nintendo has done that particularly well. they've had their missteps, but when they work on a platform, they provide experiences. As we were talking before, I played 140 hours of Breath of the Wild, and that's an awful lot of time to invest in one game that I got for $70 or something like that,
Yeah,
which,
I agree. I think Nintendo's always been really, really good at maximizing the hardware, whatever that hardware is, even though their hardware wasn't always and often wasn't ahead of the competitors, right? The Sega Genesis had a much faster processor than the Super Nintendo did, right? The N64 didn't have optical drives when Sega and Sony had gone the CD route. So, but they take what they have and they make software and games for it that maximize it. So you don't even
yes,
notice that it maybe isn't as technological or was, right? Because now everything's getting very, very similar now. But back then,
yeah,
like you wouldn't even notice that it was maybe not as high resolution graphics or not as fast a frame rate or what have you. Because if you're enjoying yourself and you're immersed in the game, like your example with Breath of the Wild, then nothing else really matters. There's a lot of talk I've heard Microsoft they might be done with new hardware with new Xboxes. Have you heard that yet? I've been
I
hearing a
have
lot
heard
about
the
that.
same thing. I think that Microsoft brings a lot to um, the gamer by being a foil to counter Sony and Nintendo. But then again, I look at Sega, and Sega has become very successful by bringing their software to the market rather than bringing their hardware to the market in order to bring their software there. Uh, I think that the hardware is becoming ubiquitous. It's becoming less specialized, and I think that that's a good thing because it means that you could buy your game and you could play your game on a variety of different platforms and it would still be the same game. I think that that's going back to the example of the book. You can read the book and the font can be different and the pages can be a little different, but you can get a lot out of the book without having to read the book with a particular e-reader or device or hardware. It just works.
I agree. So, how difficult would you say overall it was to emulate the PlayStation? And were there any parts of it that were more difficult or problematic than others that you remember that you want to highlight?
Yeah, it was a challenge. When I first started, I had put in a game, and I believe it was Ridge Racer, one of my favorite games. And the the program, there was no, this was back before there was this notion of encryption everywhere and secure chips and secure this and obfuscation. And it was just a program that was on the disk. And I went to a bookstore, an actual bookstore, and bought a MIPS R3000 manual because I had seen that the processor on the PlayStation was the MIPS R3000 and took a look at the instructions in the program and compared that to the instructions that were listed in the MIPS R3000 manual. And sure enough, it was a program. So I set out
Hmm.
about writing the emulator. Uh, I think some of the neat technology in Bleam are things like the dynamic optimizing recompiler, which is a fancy way of basically saying Bleam looks at where the data is going from here to here, and in the middle, it's manipulating it somehow. And it looks at the fastest way of doing that dynamically. And it effectively does a JIT, a just-in-time recompilation. So if there's 3 or 4 different ways of doing calculations, Bleam will choose the fastest way and put that into the JIT so that on subsequent use of that calculation, it doesn't have to recompile itself. So there's some fairly neat technology there. There's some neat technology in the graphics. I know the what gave me a load of trouble was the CD, believe it or not. The CD is controlled, and I had very little electronics experience. For example, the Romulator that I designed for the Super Nintendo for Doom, I designed it and architected it, but I didn't do the electrical engineering. That's not my wheelhouse.
Sure.
I said, what I want to do is this. I want to take off the ROM and I want to put RAM in there and I want to put a boot ROM and all these other things. And here's how it all needs to fit together. But I'm not an electronics engineer. There's people there that's their wheelhouse and that's their forte. And so a guy named Roger Schlichting did that work. I knew what I wanted to accomplish, but not all the individual steps in the electronics. And the same was true of the PlayStation. Um, I knew that the CD had to be controlled by a variety of chips. And you could look online and you could find the chips that controlled the CD. And I used a Pro Action Replay and wrote little test programs that I downloaded into the PlayStation and ran. But one of the most challenging aspects was the CD, the loading in general. That and the MDEC, the motion decoding engine for the videos. I remember when people thought Bleam was a big hoax,
I remember.
and the reason they thought it was a hoax is because there was an option in Bleam to make the videos black and white. And the technical reason is that there's three channels of data. There's the luminance, the light and dark levels of the graphics. There's the it's YCBCR. It's red and blue, and it's on a weird color axis. And you do a bunch of math, and you basically take the brightness plus these two color channels, and you end up with full color video. But on lower end PCs, I made it so that it could ignore the color channels. So it's sort of like a black and white television.
Hmm.
It doesn't process the color signals, and that saved all the processor time. But people thought it was a hoax because why would you have it
Why
so
would you
that
have it
you
in
can,
black and white, right?
why would you have it in black and white? Right. And it was a checkbox. And sure enough, uh, people used it because it allowed the game to run better. So I would say
Sure.
that the MDEC was difficult. Timing was a challenge as far as games go. Even Ridge Racer had intricate timing. Basically, what they do, and it took me months to understand exactly what was going on, only through debugging and reverse engineering the program little by little and sort of building up a working knowledge of how the PlayStation operated. There's a part where you go through a tunnel in Ridge Racer, and what it's doing is while you're going through the tunnel, it's uploading new graphics to the video RAM.
Okay.
And if the timing isn't correct on the PlayStation emulation, it doesn't know that you're in the tunnel and that it's safe to access the video RAM. And so you come out the other side of the tunnel and the graphics are all scrambled.
Huh.
And so it took a while for me to debug and to root cause exactly what was going on. And that's when I found out that, oh yes, they're using the tunnel as a way to mask the graphics upload to VRAM so that when you come out the other side, all the graphics have changed.
Interesting. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier one of the things that you found a little more challenging was the CD portion of things. And
Yes.
I thought back to earlier when you were mentioning about, you decided to put your PlayStation disc in the PC to see what would happen. Everyone said, "Oh, the black disc, and then you're like, "Wait, everything's accessible." So, what was the purpose? Are you aware of what the purpose of the black underside of the PlayStation discs was? Does
Cool.
anybody
It
know?
was
That
it
was
was
it?
just to be cool, just to be different, to stand out. Yeah. It's cool. I think,
But
yeah.
there was nothing functionally different of a PlayStation disc versus a Saturn or a Sega CD disc, or as far as copy protection, there's nothing like that. Wow,
No.
interesting.
No. Yeah, it has the black has nothing to do with it at all.
That might be one of the top 10 myths of that time that I can think of, along
Yes.
with the 24-hour non-existent download your ROM rule.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so this is kind of I know this is going to go down a rabbit hole now, but
Sure.
why did you stop updating Bleam? And when you're done answering that half of the question, which I know is a whole topic, would you ever either resume development on something like Bleam or a different emulator project in the future?
Two good questions. Stopped updating Bleam because the company was so small, there was basically me on the programming side. And we brought on another programmer. His name was Rod Mayer, excellent programmer. And he and I together worked on Bleamcast. But while we were working on Bleamcast, there was nobody to work on Bleam because it really required uh, a unique set of skills. You have to be a good reverse engineer. You have to be familiar with multiple processor languages. Um, you had to be sort of intuitive and inquisitive, and you could not have worked on anything to do with PlayStation. You couldn't, so that immediately ruled out a huge number of people. So it was very difficult to find people who could work on it, and who wanted to work on it because it was a huge amount of work and an awful lot of challenges. Um, would I work on another emulator? My current work at Limited Run Games, I work on emulators. That's sort of what I do on the Carbon engine. Carbon is basically a collection of emulators that there's a front end and there's a bunch of neat quality of life features like save states and rewind. And for Rocket Knight Adventures, for example, we had Boss Rush, which was very cool, where you basically played one boss after another and it was in order, in sequence. And it was, could you get through all the bosses? There's how to play screens, there's, pause, resume. There's a whole bunch of neat quality of life features, but there's core emulation technology there. And so that's one of
Interesting.
the hats that I wear.
So you've been working on many emulators,
I have been
potentially
working
out
on
there.
many emulators. Yes. Yes.
Unknowns to many. That's awesome.
Yes.
So let's go a little bit deeper here. So you brought up a few things I
Sure.
want to talk about. I want to talk about limited
Sure.
run games. I also want to talk
Okay.
about Bleamcast. So first, an
Yes.
admission when it comes to Bleamcast. I've used lots of your software on games, right? We talked about Home Alone and Where's Waldo and Doom and right and Bleam, right? I just showed you I had Bleam. I never actually
Oh,
tried Bleamcast. Isn't this wild? I just never did. I'll
ah.
tell you what I did do. I will show this off. I'm sure you're familiar with the Utopia boot disk from the
Oh,
Dreamcast game. Do you remember this?
yes.
I
Yes.
had this, which allowed me to load all kinds of interesting stuff onto the Dreamcast, right, including emulators.
Yes.
But I
Yes.
never, I never, got to try out Bleamcast. So tell us a little bit about how Bleamcast came to be, how that idea came into being, and what it was like.
Bleamcast was the idea of my business partner, David Herbolsheimer. The Dreamcast was just announced, and he basically sort of, because we would have multiple conversations, big long conversations every day. And he said, "What do you think about making Bleam run on the Sega Dreamcast, because a couple of the challenges that we had, in addition to the reverse engineering and the CD and the compatibility, one of them was compatibility with the various hardware, because a PC is just sort of like a free-for-all. That's the advantage of it, but there was a period of time when it was a significant disadvantage. And for something like Bleam, which really needed to be tightly optimized, um, the challenge of making it work on as many PCs as possible gave birth to ideas like you turn on this checkbox and you can watch videos in black and white, because if you're only running it on a Pentium 133 instead of a 166, this way you can sort of skirt the line of emulation speed. So one of the nice things about the Dreamcast is that it's a fixed set of hardware. It's known. There's not going to be changes. The hardware is exactly what it's set out. And so he said, what do you think about this idea? And I took a look at the specs for the Dreamcast and thought, yeah, it could be done. Absolutely. Let's get in contact with Sega. So we got in contact with Sega, and Sega was thrilled at the idea. And they sent us all the technical specs on the Dreamcast. They loaned us a Dreamcast hardware development system,
Nice.
including a GD-ROM writer and all the necessary software to do the development. And so started work on doing Bleam on the Dreamcast. And basically took the entire program and rewrote everything using all the knowledge that I had gained from the PC version. So I rewrote a brand new dynamic optimizing recompiler for the SH4 processor. Rewrote all the graphics code so that it could use the Dreamcast's Power VR architecture, which was nice because there was in Bleam for the PC, there was the software emulation and there was hardware support, which was one of the big advantages of Bleam. Bleam could make the games look better because it could run it at a higher resolution, it could run it with more colors, better fidelity. And so the same technology was present in Bleam for Dreamcast, and it allowed you to run a game like Metal Gear Solid with full screen anti-aliasing and smoothing and VGA output. And it turned out that we got this running, and we showed off Gran Turismo 2, and Sega decided that they could not allow us to use the GD-ROM format.
Ah,
So
interesting.
I had to reverse engineer the Sega BIOS. And so I dug into that and discovered the mill CD, which is effectively somebody at Sega said you should go in Japan and buy. It was sort of they sort of told us with a nudge nudge wink wink, buy Heartbreak Diaries.
Huh.
What is Heartbreak Diaries? I think it's called Heartbreak Diaries. It was a mill CD that was released in Japan, but it wasn't released anywhere else in the world. And it was a Dreamcast title that boot code on the Dreamcast. And so in conjunction with the actual hardware, because the development hardware that Sega gives developers didn't have the code, didn't have the logic for the mill CD. It wasn't present. So nobody knew that it was there, except for a few developers in Japan who used the mill CD because it was multimedia interactive something. That's what MIL stands for. And it was intended as an alternate revenue stream for Sega because you could release, videos um, and small programs and things like that on the Dreamcast. But it was a um, standard manufacturing process to create a mill CD. But of course, they didn't want anybody to know about it because of, well, the obvious,
Right.
the nefarious uses
Of course,
of the
what you
mill
can do with
CD.
it. Hmm.
But Dreamcast booting was demonstrated at, I want to say it was the E3, maybe it was 2001, 2000, when we first showed Bleamcast running on the Dreamcast with GT2. And as it turns out, totally coincidentally, that was roughly the time that the Utopia boot disc came out. And my understanding of how that came about was that they had received a copy of the Sega SDK, and an earlier version of the Sega SDK had a tool that was used to encode a program for use with MIL-CD. Now Sega removed it in subsequent versions of the SDK. I had never seen the tool, but apparently this tool existed. And when you sort of put all the pieces together, that's how they figured out that you could boot mill CDs.
Interesting. Now,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, I don't know how deep you can go with this one, but what do you think, or if you can, why do you think Sega didn't want you or couldn't allow you to use, the GD format?
They did not want the title to be licensed officially by Sega
Gotcha.
because they didn't want to get into a big legal battle
With Sony. Okay.
with Sony. Yeah. Um, they could not put they would happily license the GD-ROM format and allow us to use their libraries, their code, their, whatever, if we got permission from Sony.
Right. Which you knew
Um,
was likely not
which,
going to happen at that
yeah,
juncture.
was
Because of
right,
all
which
the,
was not going to
yeah.
happen. So that meant that everything written for Bleamcast was written from the ground up. It was all done. If the a baking analogy would be, it was built for it was baked from scratch. So everything is low level. There are no Sega libraries that are used. There's no Sega code that is used. There's no Sony code that's used either. But Sega would not license the technology that they had developed for talking to the chips, to the hardware. So that's why they sent along all the low-level technical specs and technical documentation for all the hardware on the Sega Dreamcast.
Gotcha. A clever way to, ensure that Bleamcast still came out without Sega having to get
Yes,
their hands in it. That makes sense.
that's
Okay.
exactly it.
How did you come to work for limited run games?
That is a good question. I was doing an interview with John Linneman and Audie Sorley from Digital Foundry. They were doing an interview about my past and my history, and they sort of asked what would I think about an updated version of Doom for the Super Nintendo, and I thought it would be a great idea. And then Audie went to Limited Run Games and pitched the idea, and I didn't know that he was going to pitch the idea. And then he contacted me and said, "What do you think about doing an updated version?" And I said, "For real?" And he said, "Yeah." So we decided to do it. And
Nice.
and as part of that, starting to work on Doom, they said, you've got experience working on tools, you've got experience with emulation. What do you think about coming on full time at Limited Run Games? And I did, and it'll be in another 2 weeks. I think it was the beginning of December. It'll be 3 years. Yeah,
Congratulations on almost 3 years with limited run games.
thank you.
I that was my next question after the limited run games question was going to be all about good old Super Nintendo
Oh
Doom here.
yes,
Thank you for
that's
sending me this prototype, by the way. For those that
you
don't
are.
know, I've been streaming this the last couple of weeks, and I'm happy to say somehow, thanks to Randy and in the entire chat of Twitch, we somehow managed to finish Super Nintendo Doom. There you go. I love it. Love it.
Yeah,
My
this is
my
how I
version's
did.
shinier.
Yes.
Loud and clear. Oh my God. Oh, F this. Yes! That's it! Doom is defeated!
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I said, I'm not a hardware guy. That's not my wheelhouse, but I look at this board and it's like so cool. It's just so neat. The technology that's there is amazing.
So
It's
tell us a little bit about the FX3 chip. So how is it different than the FX2?
so the FX3 is actually a Raspberry Pi RP2350 microprocessor. What it basically does is it emulates, surprise, the
Surprise, surprise.
super, yeah, the Super FX chip. Um, it has hardware on board that works with the Super Nintendo. So from a programming standpoint, the Super Nintendo does not know that it's not actually talking to a Super FX chip. It thinks that it's a Super FX chip that's there, but what's really there is this Raspberry Pi masquerading as a Super FX chip. And the advantage of that is that it can optimize, it can run things faster. Basically, what happens is I literally build a .sfc binary that runs in like Mason. I use Mason because it's awesome. And I do my development in Mason. I actually do my building, my compilation, my linking using the same software running on WinUAE, another emulator.
Familiar with that one.
Mhm. And so my development system is still on the Amiga. And so I use WinUAE to assemble, link, build my program. That generates a .sfc, which I then load into Mason and I debug it in Mason. That same binary, the exact same binary, is processed by a tool that effectively cleaves out the SuperFX program and it translates it, it converts it to C code, which is then compiled by the Raspberry Pi SDK's compiler toolchain to generate an executable. And that executable is what sits on here in addition to the actual .sfc binary ROM. And so it runs, and like I said, the Super Nintendo doesn't know that it's not really talking to a Super FX chip because it responds like a Super FX chip, but it's actually running a recompiled version of Doom, recompiled for the Super FX, because
Very
that's,
impressive.
yeah,
So,
and it, go ahead.
sorry, I was going to say, so what does the FX3 chip do that makes it run in a better, higher frame rates? Like what is tell us about how the differences between those two versions are scoped out.
So there are well, let me see. There's basically three, I think, basic differences. The addressable memory is larger. Um, the ability to do optimization is there. and the ability to emulate the rest of the circuitry. So on the board, let's see it. There we go. So that's the Raspberry Pi, that little square one.
Got it.
And there's a ROM chip there, a flash, and another ROM flash there. And those interface to the Super Nintendo. So the Super Nintendo, that's why this works. That's why it worked on your Super Nintendo, because it doesn't know that it's a foreign processor running. And so all the circuitry that's there uh, emulates the ROM chips and the RAM on the Super FX chip, because the Super FX needs RAM. It's not just a chip that's a processor. It requires RAM um, to basically act as a frame buffer. And so the Super FX3 does all of that.
And that enabled you to make, so what was it, 10 frames a second was what originally Doom SNES was running at back in the
Mhm.
original version in the 90s. This version can do 20 frames a second, roughly, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a hardware limitation. Basically, that's partially the reason that the screen is letterboxed. You can only talk to the video RAM during vertical blank. There are some tricks you can use to talk to the video RAM during horizontal blanking, but it's really, really tricky. So Doom talks to the video RAM during vertical blank, and by letterboxing it, I extend the vertical blank from what used to be, say, down here to up here. So all this additional space is now vertical blank. That's why it's black. And during that time, I can transfer about 11K, 11K bytes to video RAM. Normally, during vertical blank, you can transfer between 5 and 6K bytes. So I can transfer almost double. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but the 11K bytes times 3 vertical blanks, 3 frames, is about 33 to 34 kilobytes, which is exactly how much it requires to do the refresh of the Doom graphics display. So the 20 frames per second is a limitation of the engine. It can't really go faster than that because I basically divide the display into vertical strips in thirds. And on the first screen, I do the first third. The second screen, I do the second third. And the third screen, I do the last third and flip the double buffer.
Okay. So when you came out, or I know it's not technically out yet, but when you were designing the new version of Super Nintendo Doom here to use the FX3 chip,
Mhm.
you used your original code as the baseline and just modified things like more maps and the music and
Yes.
things of that nature. Okay, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's exactly it. I literally took the original code and started adding in the missing levels, the additional graphics, the password system. I wrote code for the videos, um, added in the
Added
new
in Rumble
music.
support,
Oh
right?
yeah, added in.
Can't forget that. Yeah, you've got the real one.
I've got the real one. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, huh?
It looks awesome. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it's
So,
nice.
could that have existed with like if a vendor, if a manufacturer decided to make this, it's is it anything special with the FX3 chip going on here, or it could have existed if they just programmed for it? It could have.
Yes, it
Okay.
could have existed back then, which is one of the things that Josh Fairhurst at Limited Run said. Make things open, provide developers with the technical documentation, with sample code, with examples, with a test ROM. And so there's a GitHub that I put together for the SNES Rumble. And there's a number of developers like Infidelity, like
Yep.
Kando,
Hmm.
for example, Sunlit, who have taken the Rumble core and incorporated it into a bunch of homebrew ROM hacks. And so now you can play a variety of games with Rumble.
I saw that. I think one of
Um,
them was a Final Fantasy 2 or 3 for Super Nintendo, I think had a Rumble version. Was that
yes,
Candos or Infidelities? I think that was
that was, I think it was
it was
Cantos.
Candos, yeah.
Yeah, and Star Fox they added, and Star Fox CD. Yeah, so
Yep.
the benefit of having it open, having it accessible. There's also support in Aries and in Mason for Rumble. And the reason I think that it was so quickly adopted and incorporated was because they're open source. That's one of the primary motivators for releasing the Doom source code 4 or 5 years ago when I did that, because there was no working example. There was no complete, here's source code for A, an entire game, or B, an entire game that uses the super effects. So I said, this really should be out there. People should be able to take a look at it, to see it. And it's the exact same code that I started with when I started working on the new version of Doom.
Awesome. So, what game or software, having said all that, because we've now run through I don't know if I'd call it your greatest hits because you've done so much, but definitely
Mhm.
the stuff that was coming to my mind when I came up with some of these questions. But what would you say, either what game or what software that you've created or had a hand in creating are you most proud of and why?
I think that definitely has to be Bleam, because of the legal precedents that it set, because of the technical. I think it's well. I was going to say there's some pretty neat technology in Doom as well, um, but I think it definitely has to be Bleam. Yeah, the bringing to the public's eye and setting precedent with a number of legal decisions that said yes, emulation is legal, that compared to screenshots are legal, it's better for the consumer. The benefits, I think, when you wouldn't, if emulation wasn't so prevalent, you wouldn't have Nintendo Switch Online, you wouldn't have backwards compatibility, and everybody benefits from. Those are just two examples of emulation. As I said, I use emulation in my development. I use WinUAE, I use Mason.
Yeah.
Emulation is,
Remember the Sega Smash Pack?
yeah,
Sure you do.
exactly, exactly, exactly. Emulation, I think, is a fundamental part of technology, because as technology advances, the need to bring forth works that have come before is of increasing importance. And as a programmer, I've often said that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We leverage and use everything that has come before us in order to enable what we're working on. And I think the same is true when it comes to emulation, um, and the ability to to use software, data, information from an earlier time to a current modern time.
I would completely agree with that. All right. So now we're going to get into some interesting stuff. So,
Okay.
first, I know you said you've only ever beaten one video game, Super Mario
Yes.
World, but you
Super
enjoy
Mario
video
World.
games. So, what are your top three favorite video games and why?
Top three favorite video games. Okay, I'm gonna have to say, this is gonna be fairly obvious. Uh, I have to say Dragon's Lair is one of them, because it was groundbreaking. It's terrible gameplay. I mean, it sort of is. But it was groundbreaking that somebody would make an animated game um, that had a very small portion of gameplay, but it was the graphics and the sound. We call them graphics, but it's really animation.
Right.
And these days, computers can do that. Computers can, PlayStation 5 can certainly, Xbox Series can certainly do that caliber of graphics. Um, do
Yeah,
it
it was
live.
basically a Disney animated, movie. I think Don
Yeah.
Bluth, right, he worked for
Yes.
Disney in the 70s, so but it's a video game. I remember when I first saw that in the arcades when I was a little kid, really, really little kid. I was born in 1980. So, but I remember like, they had like Pac-Man and Arkanoid and like those kind of games. And then all of a sudden here's like Dragon's Lair and it's like, "Oh, what's this?"
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
this doesn't belong. Let me get over to this and see what's going on here. So I
Yes.
totally understand. But yeah, the gameplay can be definitely can be a little rough there. I
Yes.
beat it. I only ever beat the Sega CD version of it,
Ah,
and it was a lot of pain. I did that a few years ago actually on stream, but it was a lot of pain, a lot of rage. Took me 3 sessions to do it,
wow.
and I vowed after I was done, I was like, I'm never playing that again. Fun
Yes.
to watch. Fun
Yeah.
to watch.
It's fun to watch. Yes.
Yeah.
I like watching the games. Watching somebody play the games more than actually playing them. I don't like the pressure, the intense drive, but I enjoy watching like walkthroughs on YouTube where somebody goes through and plays a game. I enjoy that definitely.
Awesome.
So I would have to say Breath of the Wild. I think I described Nintendo's gameplay as an onion. You just peel back one layer, and there's another layer, and there's another layer, and there's another layer, and you just keep going, and it's further and further and further and further, and the number of layers, the amount of stuff that's in that game
Yeah, you can
is
do almost
amazing.
anything. It's
You,
very
you
open
can.
world.
And when I first started playing it, and the skill that's required is very well done. The skill that you have to have, you develop over time. And there's this scene where the rain is coming down, and at first it's rain, and so they introduce the concept of the rain in the environment to you slowly. The climbing up hills and steep hills, and you start to slip because it's muddy. And then all of a sudden, the clouds start rolling in, and the skies get darker, and then there's this crack of thunder, and the screen lights up, and the switch vibrates, and it shakes, and it startles you. It's amazingly well done.
It
Um,
visually looks great. It sounds great. Like they definitely put a lot of love into it. I can't get anywhere in it. I've tried. I have it for the Switch. I can't make any progress. I never know what to do.
uh,
But I can
I
definitely
don't
see
either.
why.
Watch some YouTube videos.
That's what I need to do. Need to watch what people do. I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't know what to do. Like, and I think that's
Yeah.
why so many people love it. You can just lose yourself like in an entire like week, month, just playing. They're like,
Yes.
pick it up tomorrow, see what we find, this day. So I definitely
Yeah,
understand why it's so
exactly.
many people's favorite games and why it's one of your top three. So you got
And
Dragon's Lair, Breath of the Wild, and what's your third?
it's going to have to be Super Mario World, not because I
Knew it.
completed it, but because I remember, um, and it's not so much about the technical excellence, but when the Super Nintendo came out and you're in like the underground levels and you hear that echo of, the dripping water and the echo or the translucency with the ghosts, and that circle, the keyhole effect where it looks like a key that's done with HDMA. Um, and it's Super Mario. I think that definitely has to be one of my top three.
That's a great game. And with all the hidden exits, I mean that's you could spend
Yeah.
many, many hours in that one trying to find everything too.
Yes.
Very well done game. Cool.
Yeah.
What's your favorite video game system of all time?
Favorite video game system.
And if it's a
I
computer, you can include a computer in it if you'd rather go that route.
oh,
I'll let you choose.
if it's a computer. I would I think I have to say Super Nintendo.
Yeah,
Um, because there was just such a huge diversity of games for the platform. It really broke ground in terms of hardware features, the graphics features, the sound features. Um, and although it wasn't Nintendo's idea, the notion of adding chips to enhance, to expand the basic capabilities of the hardware. I forget the engineer's name, but it was a long, long time ago. And he came up with the idea of putting the hardware in the cartridge, and in concert with the console, to form the complete unit. And I think I mean, I think the PlayStation is a great platform. I think Xbox is a great platform. I loved the Dreamcast. I think Dreamcast is a phenomenal platform. It
great
really,
system.
yeah, the hardware on the Dreamcast, spectacular. Um, but yeah, if I had to pick one, I would think would be Super Nintendo because it came out right when I was getting into console gaming. That was
Yeah,
my
that makes
first.
sense.
I mean, I
It
had a
had. Go ahead. I'm listening. I'm sorry.
oh yeah, yeah, no, I had a Nintendo 8-bit. I had a TI 99/4A from Texas Instruments. Um, I had a Commodore 64. I think that had a lot of games for it. But for as far as consoles, a dedicated system, yeah, I
Super
think
Nintendo. I mean,
Super Nintendo.
it was a great system. It had tons of third-party support and great
Yes.
first-party games as well. It had a lot of great role-playing games. It had, of course,
Hmm.
the Mario, Super Mario World and the Zelda. Zelda, I thought was a masterpiece. That's probably, I think, the Super Nintendo Zelda, Link to the Past, is my favorite Zelda of all time.
Oh wow.
Just a lot of great games for it. So yeah, I can totally see why that'd be your favorite system. It's
Yes.
a good one. It's a keeper. All right, are we ready for some viewer questions? You want to give some of these a
Absolutely.
shot? All
Sure.
right. Uh, Nicholas DeLeon says, I'd love background on how Jobs came to talk about Bleam at Macworld in 1999. Did someone from Apple reach out to Bleam or the other way around? Just curious how that all went down. Very hard to imagine something like that happening nowadays.
Good question. He's misremembering. It was
Hmm.
Connectix Virtual Game Station that was featured at Macworld because they did a Mac version of the Connectix Virtual Game Station.
He's
Yes, but
conflating
Bleem,
Connectix with Bleam, yeah.
yes, but Bleem was the nascent demo that was used to launch Xbox. Did you know that?
Ah, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, we got a call from I forget who it was at Microsoft who wanted a version of Bleem that didn't show a title page, that you just put a disk into the PC and it booted the game, and it was for a demo for Bill Gates. And
Wow.
yeah, and basically there were two competing teams at Microsoft that wanted to work on what eventually became the Xbox. There was the DirectX team, and they had a demo where they put in Tomb Raider into the PC, and Tomb Raider played on the PC. And the other team had a PowerPoint presentation, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I have a feeling that the PowerPoint presentation is not the one that won.
No, no.
Good stuff. I didn't know that. So you learn something new every day.
There you go.
All right. So this next question is from Macroblock, who says, I'd ask him about his first game. which apparently he wrote in assembly when he was 13. How did he learn
Yes.
assembly? Why did he skip all the other language the rest of us usually go through first? And can we play the game somewhere?
Excellent question. Um, I have a copy of it on floppy, and I may have a copy of it on tape at home. Uh, and I will endeavor to get it sent to somebody who can archive it. It is my first assembly language program. I was 13 and I didn't skip all the languages. I did write my first basic program when I was 11. But it was a simple input two numbers and output the sum and the equivalent of a hello world. I was very fortunate to go to a junior high that had computers. Like I said, we got the computers in, and it was like this mystical world. We discovered the Commodore PET has a built-in monitor, a built-in debugger, effectively. And there was a game called Space Invaders that was ported to the Commodore PET by a guy named Jim Butterfield. And Jim Butterfield was very well known in the Toronto PET um, sphere, I guess. He was just a very, very well known guy. And I was 11 or 12 and pulled out the phone book and looked up Jim Butterfield and would call him up and ask him questions. And he very graciously answered the questions.
Nice.
Um, but my first program was written in BASIC. And then assembly came about because it was like this mystical, magical other world. I had a MOS 6502 um, hardware manual. It was about this thick, and it has like a checkerboard kind of pattern on it. And I'm sure some of the viewers out there will remember the 6502 book. And I learned assembly language that way.
Nice. YouTube viewers, if anyone remembers the book, pop it in those comments. We want to
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
Get a dialogue going. All right. So Shokinen asks, this is a two-part question.
Mhm.
Shokinen asks first, from a technical standpoint, what was the most interesting solution that you had to come up with? And then second, what do you think modern emulation could learn from the Bleem era?
Good questions. I think the most interesting technical solution that I came up with was the dynamic optimizing recompiler for Bleam. Uh, it's it is um, it is a double-edged sword patent. Say it.
Hmm.
Um, you can do a search, and I've got a couple of patents on the dynamic recompilation technology. It was a unique solution to the problem of the Sony PlayStation has a number of chips on it. It's got a CD chip, it's got a geometry chip, it's got a motion video chip, it's got a picture unit chip, it's got a sound chip, it's got all of these chips. And a PC basically has a processor. At this time, back in 1999, 90-ish, maybe 98. And so the problem that I tried to solve was how to emulate all of these chips on one machine. And the solution was speed through use of a dynamic optimizing recompiler. Um, I think. And what I think emulators these days are doing an amazing job, frankly. I mean, like I
Absolutely.
said, I use Mason all the time. It's spectacular. DuckStation,
Yep.
phenomenal.
Great emulator.
Um, I don't know that I've really got much advice because they're doing such a good job. Emulation is hard. Emulation requires um, really, really good technology. It requires an ability to reverse engineer, to excavate and investigate and dig and sort of continue to pull something apart little by little by little until you really understand what's going on. Um,
So a
and
lot
the
of patience,
emulators,
a lot of
yeah,
patience
and a lot of
required.
patience.
Yeah.
And the emulators that I've used are excellent. If I wish I had the technical capabilities that I do with Mason. There was a bug in Doom that was fixed in the version that I sent you that you were playing the other day. And it was only because there were such powerful debugging tools in Mason that I was able to track down the bug. And it still took 2 days,
How did you
which
become
for
aware? How did you become aware of that bug?
the testers said, you're when you're in certain rooms and in a certain place, the game freezes, and that that's not good.
Gotcha.
Um, so what I did was I worked with his name is Matt at Bitmap Bureau, and he put together a version of the firmware, which is the code that runs on the ARM side of the RP 2350, that if it detects that the Super Nintendo has frozen through a watchdog timer, after 30 seconds, it resets the machine and makes the cartridge visible as a USB drive
Interesting.
on the PC. And I wrote software that basically recorded every movement until it would freeze. And so there was a tester in France who was able to reliably get the program to hang. And so he used this special version of the software to reliably get it to hang, then sent me the recording file,
And
which
you were
I
able to
then
see
imported.
all the key presses per frame to see exactly what point it crashed, and then you understood why. That makes sense.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's awesome. I think you did a great job with the latest version. I mean, you saw I only found what was it towards the end, the
One
weird
bug.
clipping
Yeah.
bug. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Um, it's I can't wait for it to come out. Do you think there's going to be any? I know we're on viewer questions, but do you think there's going to be any limited availability when this game comes out, like people to cancel things like that, or hard to
I
say?
don't know. I don't think that because they basically the way limited run works is they have an open pre-order period where anybody can order, and then they close the pre-order period, and that's how they know how many to manufacture.
Gotcha.
So there, I will say we can work out something because I've got a few that they set aside for me. But for one day for a stream bonus, you can have somebody win a
That
copy
could
of
be a fun one. That sounds
yeah,
awesome.
and I will supply the copy
Nice.
of Doom
All
and a
right.
Rumble controller.
I'll take that. We'll chat soon then.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That sounds like a fun little prize for someone to win.
Yes.
For those of you that pre-ordered this, you're getting a treat, man. Game is awesome.
Well, thank you.
Like I've never been able to beat a first-person shooter with a controller before this, so
Yeah.
and that included Thy Flesh Consumed, even though I was raging at like every level in that. It's not his fault.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's very
It's
difficult. It's
hard.
very
Yeah.
difficult.
Yes.
But if I can do it, then you can all do it too. 'Cause I'm not good at video games. Okay, so we still okay on time for you?
Yeah, yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right, next question.
The
Uh,
puppy will come in at some point
and then we'll know.
and
That'll
then we'll
be
know.
that'll be the bell.
Yeah.
Christian Iverson asks, "How on earth did you find the patience to micromanage every single instruction cycle in the Game Boy Advance Quake prototype?"
I'm glad that he liked it. Um, it was a huge amount. I want to say it probably took me 2 years of work. I'm a workaholic. I'm a self-confessed workaholic. I love what I do, so it's not really work for me. Um, but yeah, it started off on the Game Boy Advance, and I timed all of the instructions and the different memory accesses. And Demetris, Modern Vintage Gamer, did a video that sort of dives into some of the technology in what I was working on, Quake for the Game Boy Advance. And it went through a number of stages. I started it off, I want to say maybe 90, maybe 95, 96, I think, time frame. Um, and started it as a technical demo. I was doing the same blueprint as I did for Doom. It's like, hey, I'll get this thing running and then I'll demo it to id or to a couple of companies that are publishers and see if they want to pick it up. And it just the Game Boy Advance lost popularity very, very quickly, and it just sort of sat on a couple of flash cartridges from a company called Lixang that is no longer in existence because they were sued into
Yeah, I
oblivion.
figured they would have been. I remember Luke saying.
Yes, yes. But there was a hardware called the MBV2 multi-boot hardware. It was like a small cartridge that plugged into your parallel port. And I jury rigged up this development system that let me create software on the Game Boy Advance. Um, and it took a lot of time. It eventually went through porting to Symbian phones, to an iPod video, to Android, to Fire TV. You can actually get it on Amazon. It's called Cyboid, Cyboid, and you can get it um, on Amazon Fire TV sticks, and you can play split screen two-player
Oh,
3D first-person shooter. It's effectively Quake 2 level technology. So it's appropriate for the $19.95 Fire TV stick. But as far as I know, it's the only real 3D first-person shooter that's a real 3D first-person shooter on
person
that
shooter.
hardware.
Very
Yeah.
cool. I would have loved to have given that a shot. So Quake's another game that I've never beaten, but I love it. I found my old Quake shareware CD. Still got it. I
Ah,
found it was actually right
nice.
underneath Bleam, interestingly. And it's got the
Nice.
Nine Inch Nail soundtrack and everything. So good. But I would have loved to have given this a whirl on the Game Boy Advance. I don't think it works on the Game Boy Advance Mister core. So I primarily emulate through the Mister
Um,
now. I don't know why that is.
huh.
Um,
Well, I
but
do some fairly nasty tricks with the hardware. There's a couple of different processor modes, and I switch into different processor modes because these processor modes have shadow registers. So I
aha,
use it to effectively give me more processor registers. I know that I think it was MGBA had a bug that manifested itself in that the Quake demo didn't run, and now it does.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'll have to look deeper into it. That could be a fun little
yeah, it's
project.
pretty neat.
Randy
There's
Linden's Quake prototype.
yeah.
It
Forest of Illusion put it out there.
is it complete? Like, can you get to the end of the game?
No, it's not a complete game. It's only got 3 levels, and
Okay,
and they're levels from Art Apple, from Wouter van Oortmersen, um,
gotcha.
because it was a demo. So the actual first map, the E1 M1, isn't publicly available. I haven't published that because it's property of id.
Right. Makes sense. Mauricio Sanagati asks, Bleem had a type of cracking prevention that, if I remember correctly, had very little cracked versions. If he can talk about that, it would be cool. So I think he's asking about the copy protection,
The
what
copy
information
protection.
you'd be interested in sharing about how that all worked.
It was cracked within a couple of days, which is unfortunate because we were really dependent on sales in order to
Sure.
keep fighting. Um, but it did some neat things. Like I said, it had a processor detection logic, and it loaded a version for, excuse me, AMD versus Intel versus whatever um, dynamically. It it in Windows 95 and Windows 98 dynamically jumped into ring 0, which is a protected privileged mode, which was not supposed to be possible, but Bleam did it because I needed a certain memory map.
You spend a
Um,
lot of time doing things that shouldn't be possible to do, but you do it anyway.
yes, exactly,
See
exactly.
this theme here.
It is a common thread. I love the challenge of the project. That's usually what drives me. The difficulty level has to be there, the uniqueness of the project. That's pretty much what is a common theme across all the projects that I've worked on. Um, the discs on Bleam had those rings that are basically laser errors. Um, and the software was downloadable. It was one of the first times that you basically bought the disc, but the software was downloadable. And there was a lot of things we did right at Bleam.
So this person, Rob Steiner Jr., is asking, I would ask about coding Where's Waldo on the NES, not even kidding. So I think Rob wants to know what that experience was like.
Okay, so Where's Waldo is another example of the technology is much more impressive than the end result of the game. Uh, it does high resolution images, high resolution for Nintendo 8-bit through the MMC3. So there's a bunch of different levels where the graphics are raster interrupt driven. The um, the train maze was unique, and the searching in the cave where you've got the viewfinder and it's all dark was unique. We really wanted to set out to make a Where's Waldo game that paralleled the books. And so searching for Waldo um, was difficult because there's only so many pixels.
Right.
And Waldo, while he looks unique, once you're used to looking for Waldo, you can find Waldo fairly quickly, but it sort of looks like a picture pixel mess.
Mess. Yeah.
Um, yes, the
There's
mini
a
games
lot
are
going
more fun.
on. I can see
There
what
is.
happened. I mean, you're trying to take, it was a book series, right? Where's Waldo? And where you have those nice glossy pages and everything's nice and clear and printed
Yes,
on and you're trying to smash them to this tiny NES resolution, but still make it so there's a lot of possibilities where Waldo could be. So you're actually looking. Otherwise, if you had made it like just a little section, you would have found Waldo in seconds, and then there's no game. So I
exactly.
can appreciate the technical challenges there. Like I don't know
Well,
there
that
would
was
be a better
it.
way to do it.
Yeah, well, we could have done it where everything was larger, scrolled around more, um, basically we did it so that there was two screens where it could scroll back and forth, but we could have made it where it scrolled around with
Sure,
bigger graphics and
that's true.
yeah, yeah. I think Where's Waldo came out reasonably. It's not my proudest moment, but considering what it does on a technical level, I think it's pretty neat.
I would agree. I don't know if there's a question in here. Let me just read it to you. So
Okay.
first they show a screenshot of the retail Bleam box that shows the two cars, one's pixelated and one looks much higher res, along with the little disclaimer at the bottom about why you can't show the actual game.
Which
And
actually changed. We
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So hold that thought. I want you to expand on that because I want to know about that. So Nathan says, we're posting this picture. On one hand, I'm grateful to them for taking all the legal crap from Sony to try to prove that an emulator can be a valid legal product. You young whippersnappers probably don't remember how much Sony Nintendo rhetoric of the time was emulation is illegal, and then
Yes.
showed this picture. So Nathan is thanking you, and I would say the same thing. Thank you for doing that. Knowing full well that many in the emulation community, and I will sit here and admit that I was one of those fools that at the time it was not 100% behind commercialization of emulation because I was a teenager and I worked at a pizza shop and I didn't understand the value of things. I'd like to apologize for that to you, Randy, in the
No
very
problem.
beginning. I totally different outlook now, obviously. But that being said, um, tell us a little bit about that illustration about not being able to show the video game and what happened there.
So there was a lot of different ways in which we were sued, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, at first, we were sued based on Connectix. So literally, the lawsuit that was filed against Connectix, they changed the names and filed the same lawsuit, even though we had done something completely different. Everything was reverse engineered. Everything was clean room. There was no knowledge of how the PlayStation operated. Um, then what we did was we tried to show the difference between running the game and the possibilities of the enhancements because Bleam supported Direct 3D, hardware acceleration, so you could run games at a higher resolution with higher colors, higher fidelity, better. It made them better looking. Uh, and so we were trying to show this is your game and this is your game when it's running on Bleam. And so we were sued for copyright infringement for showing screenshots of, I think it was Gran Turismo 2. Yeah. And the argument was that we couldn't use the screenshots from Gran Turismo 2 because they were copyright. And one of the decisions that eventually came down and was appealed, and on subsequent court decisions was ruled in our favor, was that because it's providing information that's useful, I'm paraphrasing here, to the consumer in choosing what they want to buy. It's called comparative analysis or something like that. That it was fair use. That even though the screens and the images may be copyrighted, it is a fair use of those copyrighted images because it is providing a comparison of available products.
Sure. Otherwise, what would game magazines have done if that had stood and you'd lost? How would you
Yeah.
show any screenshots of any video games when you're reviewing them, or
Yes.
compare Mortal Kombat 2 for Super Nintendo versus the Genesis? I would, you wouldn't be able to. So that's huge. Yeah,
Exactly. It was a big legal decision. So
huge.
that's why the screenshots are what they are.
V64 Junior. I love your name, V64 Junior. I think most of us know what that is. Ask if Xband support was built into Super Nintendo Doom, or if you had to download a patch, or maybe both. Did it patch like other Xband compatible games? Were you involved in said patch? I guess I would tack on, did it even work on the Xband?
Yes, it did.
It did.
It
Interesting. I didn't
did.
know that.
Before Doom was released, I worked with Catapult Entertainment to add the hooks and the minimum support into Doom for the Super Nintendo so that it was there, it was present on the actual shipping game, but you still needed to download a patch in order to get the full game. It was player versus player, one-on-one deathmatch. And it did work on Xband. And to answer his question, it was both. It was part of the actual game code, and it was built as part of a patch.
Impressive. I never had an X band. I always wanted one, but my parents, we were limited in which things we could get. So,
Yes.
I didn't get to own one of those. But I always wondered, what did work and not work, and I never realized that Super Nintendo Doom was one of the ones that
Yeah.
worked on the X band. They have X bands for both Super Nintendo and
And
Genesis,
says,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
they did. And the hardware is very, very impressive. It basically was sort of like the equivalent of the Pro Action Replay, where it could patch existing games, but it also had RAM, it had ROM, it had a lobby and matchmaking, it had the modem, it had
Nice.
support for a keyboard. Yeah,
Very ahead of its time, right?
oh yeah, it was amazing. Amazing
Nice.
hardware.
All right. Joe Black 2K asks, I would really like to know how it worked without a bias. Did you emulate the bias or recreate it? Still to this day, most emulators need a PlayStation 1 bias except for Bleam.
Uh, it was reverse engineering of the BIOS and writing a original BIOS. That's how it worked. So there was effectively a BIOS in Bleam that was a complete original clean room developed BIOS. That's how it worked.
Impressive.
Thank you.
Can you explain the tech behind Bleamcast's visual improvements over the PlayStation? Did you develop that per game, or was it a general engine that could work with most PlayStation games? And Skippy also wants it known that I still enjoy playing Gran Turismo 2 on my Dreamcast.
Oh,
Skippy.
good. I'm glad. Yeah, the technology was general, but it was tuned and optimized for each title individually. So, for example, um, Gran Turismo 2 used certain graphics features that were not used in Metal Gear Solid. And conversely, Metal Gear Solid used certain graphics features that were not used in Gran Turismo 2. So the core engine was the same, but the individual titles were optimized and tweaked um, to maximize the for a couple of reasons, but mostly to maximize the potential improvements. They all, for example, could do VGA output with full screen anti-aliasing. Um, but the GT2 rear view mirror was unique. Metal Gear Solid's blurring and motion blur effects were unique. And so they used different graphics commands and elements that were tweaked for those two titles.
Impressive. Yeah, the Dreamcast, like I still remember to this day, like graphically, it looked amazing. All of the games on it looked incredible compared to what the PlayStation and the Saturn were capable of. And
Yeah.
even though I never got to enjoy Bleamcast, maybe one day I still have my Dreamcast upstairs, and maybe we can talk and
Oh, well, I'll
I
see if
can,
I got
we can
copies of it
yeah,
and
we'll
send
chat. We'll
them your
chat.
way.
That
Yeah.
could be fun to stream some stuff on that too. But I can just think in my head what it probably would have looked like and felt like to play it on the Dreamcast, and that would have been freaking amazing. So
Yeah, it was pretty
yeah,
cool.
Okay, here's the question. It's from Neo107. I heard a funny story about how Pico Incorporated and you talked for the first time. Would like to know how it happened from your side, and what was your reaction about someone wanting the Bleam name?
Okay. I received I want to say it was an email, one or two emails from somebody at Pico Interactive who wanted to license the Bleam name. And at that point, this was a few years ago, I had nothing to do with Bleam anymore. And so I said I didn't own the Bleam name, didn't own the graphics, that he should contact David Herpelsheimer and see about him if he had knowledge or ownership of it. And that's the whole story. I didn't know what they were planning on doing with Bleam. I didn't know if there was going to be anything that came of it. But yeah,
Got
that's
it.
yeah.
I saw there was some sort of Kickstarter. I literally learned all of this like in the last like couple days. There was
Oh
some sort
yeah.
of Kickstarter for this. I guess it's like a gaming network, maybe in the vein of like what Steam does. I was trying to understand it,
I
and
don't. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't super clear to me. That doesn't mean that the Kickstarter is not clear, but just to me, I'm trying to get what is it? What is where does the Bleam name figure in here? Is it just because you think Bleam, you think retro, so here's a way to play retro games in a unified way? Maybe I think that might have been what they were going for.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like the Kickstarter was successful. I think it met like 20 to 25% of its goal, if I
Oh
remember,
wow.
and that was where it landed. There is a website that is using Bleem's name, and I don't know, I'm not suggesting you do or don't go here, but bleem.net, should anyone go there, does seem to have a
That's
frequently asked
them. Yeah.
questions. It is them, so they're the same. It's the same
Yeah.
entity.
I
Okay.
believe they are the same. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that might be something we want to, maybe I'll want to go back to that at a future point here and do a little more research, find out what's going on with that. It's very interesting. Uh, and look, I know companies will do this all the time, like Comp USA, for example. Do you remember Comp USA? I know
Oh
you're from
yeah.
Canada, but so Comp USA was really big in the States, and then they went away, and then a company bought the name, and all of a sudden there was a CompUSA.com again. Circuit City, same thing. They went away,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden Toys R Us did it, and then they got bought by a company. So I know companies will sometimes take over brand names. It's just interesting. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Bleem name. It's just
Yeah.
interesting choice, you know?
Yes. For what they're yeah. I'm
For
not
yeah.
clear on what they want to achieve.
So here's the next question from
Hmm.
Jason Lee. Jason Lee asks, "What happened to David?" And then says, "What's his last name over there?" I think that was David
Herpelsheimer.
Herpelsheimer. Yeah, Herpelsheimer,
David
yeah.
Herpelsheimer.
Are you still friends? Do you still work together? And in general, what has happened to the old Bleam team? And then Jason Lee also wants to add, by the way, Randy is a legend and I could listen to him all day. I hope that he is having an exceptional life.
Oh, that's so kind. Well, thank you. Um, I have not spoken to David since the Bleam days. I believe he lives in Las Vegas. I've tried to track him down a few times, but have been unsuccessful. Um, the other guys that were part of Bleam, Will Kemp was an actor, and he was in an episode of Charmed.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
Scott Carroll is an attorney. I think he was in Vegas. Um, and I don't know where most of the other people are. Bleam
Gotcha.
sort of dispersed and dissolved, and yeah.
So Blue Rogue asks, how serious was the Sony lawsuit? I remember Bleam and Connectix being big emulators for the PlayStation. Connectix won, but was then bought by Sony, and the tech would later show up in the PS2, 3, or PSP. Bleam worked with Dreamcast, Curious if there were plans beyond Dreamcast. So I would say let's tackle the question about how serious the Sony lawsuit was.
Very serious. Multi-millions of dollars. Um, Serious. And I think the end result was worth it. Um, if I had to do it all over again, I think I would, because it was done with good intentions. Bleam was not an attempt to take anything from Sony. It was something that was intended to provide opportunity for gamers, for developers, um, and I think the end result of the legal precedents that were set was worthwhile.
I agree. McLovin Carnero says, "What's your favorite socks color?"
White.
Same. Like 99% of my socks are all white, except for I have one pair of black dress pants socks, and that's
I am the same way. I've got
it.
two pair of black dress socks and otherwise white.
Nice one. Thiago Rodriguez asks, emulators are pretty complex pieces of software. Which one is harder to code? A full game from scratch or an emulator?
Hmm. I am going to have to say they each have challenges. They each have challenges. With an emulator, you would think that it's easier because everything is all predefined. It's like, oh, it has to do this and it has to do that. And here's how you can, nail down exactly what the specifications are. Whereas with a game, it's more open-ended. You can design your own game, and then you can make things fit within the game. But I think the challenge with games is now, especially graphics, technology. Um, of course, you've got something like Unreal Engine, where there's a lot of titles that are using Unreal, saves you from having to do so. But back in the day, you had to write your own rasterizers and
Right.
your own, all of your own graphics technology. Um, I think they're both challenging in different ways.
This person's name is Someone Bring Little Nicky Game Boy Color to Switch. And this person asks, why did you never take off on your own emulation specialist company like Digital Eclipse or M2 after winning the Bleamcast lawsuit?
Um, because it never really, um, it never really was about Bleam. It was, for me, it was about the technology. It was about the opportunity, the choice, the providing that bridge, that gateway, to allow the games to be played on a different platform. And I think Bleam had run its course. It, uh, I think it ended sooner than we had wanted by a long shot. Um, that's a tough question. But I think after the intense development and pressure and the lawsuit, I think everybody was just done, ready to move on.
That makes sense. I I know that feeling when when it's ready to it's time to go, it's ready to move on, like, it's
Yeah,
the next time for the next chapter. I definitely get
exactly.
that. David Masters asks, how were you able to broker a deal to get a product like Bleam into Electronics Boutique? And pause real quick for those that may not have been around during this era. Electronics Boutique, EB, Software, etc., Babbage's, GameStop. These are all one company that all eventually became GameStop. And so, yeah, we'll stick with How were you able to broker a deal to get a product like Bleam into EB?
That was David. David was a marketing and advertising and sales genius, and he was the one who was able to get it into all the stores.
Yeah, I remember a lot of stores had them, not just EB, but I remember Best Buy, for
And
example,
yeah, Best Buy,
and
Fry's.
Fry's. Yep. So that was definitely I, that's huge because you have the emulation community that was online, but not
Yes.
everyone that had interest was in that environment, right? Like you had the IRC and your websites and all of
Yes.
that, but there's a whole and you knew this, a whole subset of people that had no idea about any of this stuff, and that's what you would do to reach them is you would get an emulator into a big box store. So,
Yeah, which was
uh,
unheard of at the time.
yep, sure was, sure was. Okay. Heap Stack from Blue Sky asks, would you consider open sourcing your older material as it would be of great historical interest for us nerds, no matter how unclean the code would be?
Yes. I think I started that with Doom. I intend to, uh, I was going to say, clean up um, the source code for Dragon's Lair. When I've got time, I've got my original Amiga 40 megabyte hard drive that I will try and get the source code for the 64 emulator. Um, New version of Doom. Yeah, so I've started on the road to open sourcing code, and I think that it would be good to do more of that, and I will.
This is kind of a two-part question. So, Paladin Larrick from my Zophar's Realm Discord says, what did you find more difficult to do? Dragon's Lair on the Amiga or Doom on the Super Nintendo? And then Paladin Larrick also follows up with, what do you think about the fact that uh, games today, some of them are not as optimized, even though there's, hardware that's capable of doing amazing things now. So kind of a two-parter question there.
Good questions. Um, I think Doom was harder. I think Doom was harder because with the Amiga and Dragon's Lair, it was more about coming up with all the pieces, um, like we talked about, getting the digitizer for the video and the digitizer for the audio, and the compression formats, and there was a custom disk format, and then there was the copy protection, and there was all the pieces that all had to come together. But once they were together, like for example, there was a team of artists because the graphics, when they were digitized, had pixel artifacts. So it wasn't nice, solid, clear, smooth colors that compress better. So all of the individual frames were sent to artists who were paid 5 cents a frame to clean up, to go in and pixel clean the frames. I wrote a tool called Cast, Cell Animation Sequencer Tool, and I will open source Cast as well. That's part of the Dragon's Lair code. And Cast basically was the compression engine. Once that was done, Dragon's Lair was mostly a matter of getting to the finish line, where all the pieces were now there, all the various bits of technology were all assembled, and it was a matter of getting all the frames of animation done, finishing off the digitizing of the audio. There wasn't a lot of um, I mean, there was a lot of unique technological developments in creating it, but once the problems were solved, it was mostly a matter of finishing the work. With Doom was one challenge after another. There was we don't have a development system. We don't have hardware. Um, We don't know how the engine works because the code isn't public domain. The code hasn't been released. So I created my own engine. Uh, the game needed to run at a minimum speed, so there was optimization challenges. The game couldn't double buffer because on the original Doom, there's a 64K byte SRAM, but there is only enough RAM for what I call the 3/5 um, rasterization technology. Basically, I split the screen up into one, two, three pieces, and I render the first piece, render the second piece, render the third piece, and I can show that. But there isn't enough SRAM to have a second copy of three pieces. There's enough for two. And so what I basically do is I render two pieces, transfer them into VRAM, render the third piece, transfer it to VRAM, and do the page flip. And it's a very tricky bit of code. Um, a lot of the Doom behavior came from reverse engineering, from playtesting. Uh, so it wasn't as if I could just look up how many hit points does this particular monster have, or how does this technology work. So Doom was just one challenge after another, I would have to say. I think
Got it.
that was harder.
Yeah, it sounds like it sure was. And took a while for some of the technology to catch up, right? to
Exactly.
but what you did was amazing, Randy. So,
Well, thank you.
thank you for doing it. And what
I
would you say
think
your favorite emulator would be and why?
I would have to say it's Mason,
Yeah.
because it is so powerful. It's got so many features for developers, for tinkerers, for people that want to sort of pull back the covers and see how games are assembled and put together, and how the graphics are all laid out. Um, it's a multi-system emulator. It's open source. A lot of this is possible because of Mason, because I was able to go in, and this was added to Mason. Um, I did my development long before we had prototype hardware by using Mason and adding rumble support, so that it would rumble with an Xbox joystick. So yeah, I would have to say Mason is my favorite.
Mason it is. Very
Yeah,
cool. Well, listen, Randy, thank you so much for spending time with
my
everybody here and
pleasure.
with me and chatting it up. And I learned a lot. There's a lot you told me that I actually had no idea about. And there was a lot of research I did that I didn't know till a few days ago about, despite us being, around at at the same time there. So
Oh
thank you
yeah,
for spending some time. And thank you also for frequenting my streams and
my
watching
pleasure.
me suffer through the pain of thy flesh consumed that
Oh,
last
you did
episode.
amazing. I could not go through it. So yes, it was
I didn't
fun.
know if I'd be able to get to the end. I just kept thinking about how I barely got anywhere in the Super Nintendo original Doom. So I
Yeah,
was like, oh man, I got to try. So it's very playable, everybody. I'm making jokes about it. It's not Randy. Episode 4 is just notoriously difficult in Doom if you're
it
not familiar
is.
with it. It's like really difficult. And it's even more difficult when you aren't using a keyboard and a mouse. But what he did, the fact that I got through to the end and did it, like if you pre-order this, you're going to absolutely love it. And if you didn't, well, there's always the aftermarket, or maybe that contest. We'll talk about that in a
Yeah,
minute.
exactly. Exactly.
So cool. Well, listen, Randy, thanks again. Appreciate you. Is there
My
any
pleasure.
closing thought you have for the viewers, or anything you want people to know before we end it?
I want to say thank you to the viewers for their support. As I said, I got very, very lucky to find my calling early on and love what I do. So it's not work to me, but it is so gratifying when people appreciate and like the projects that I've worked on. It makes me feel really, really great. And so thank you to the viewers and to the audience for their support, past, present, and future. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Randy, thanks again. I'll see you soon. And
Yes.
to all my viewers, thanks for watching. See you all soon.
See you.
Bye, Randy. Hey, do me a favor. If you enjoyed the content you just watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting below. It really helps me out and allows YouTube to push this to more awesome people like yourself. Now go, mortals and immortals.